Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Overexplained, and we have two new hotfixes to talk about. One is for today, May 9th, and then the other one is for yesterday, May 8th. Let's go ahead and jump in and start with May 8th. So, in the original patch, the hogwash was pretty insane. It was scaling with regen and putting up a ridiculous amount of just max health increased numbers. So ultimately, it has been nerfed here, and the biggest nerf I would say to it is that the enchantment triggers on Hogwash now trigger on the Hogwash being used. Before, what the Hogwash said is that whenever you heal or gain regeneration, you would ultimately do whatever the enchantment was on the Hogwash. So if that was fiery or poison, you would give fire and poison for every time that any item ultimately triggered any heal or regeneration, which was super strong. So it has been nerfed. The other item that was pretty crazy was Lemonade Stand. It used to have, I believe, a 7-second cooldown. We'll look at that in a second here, but the Lemonade Stand has been changed to now a 12-second cooldown, 11-second, and 10-second. And we can see that the big change here from Lemonade Stand, where it was in the previous patch, is that it in the new Season 2 patch gained this clause that says change to gain regeneration equal to 5% of your max health for the fight. That is pretty insane. As it turns out, by the time that you're putting this Lemonade Stand on board, you're more than likely going to be gaining like 100, 150 plus regeneration. So this item was super strong, so they've increased the cooldown of it to be now starting at 12, 11, and then 10 seconds. So I think that's probably a pretty good change overall, just because of how potent the Hogwash and Lemonade Stand strategy was. And the third culprit in it was the Washawali Bird, which used to both heal and give regeneration, but now it only gains regeneration. So pretty big change there. In turn, they've nerfed the Washawali Bird, but they have buffed Bushel. So Bushel now has its heal clause back on it. In the original patch, they had removed this heal clause, so now it ultimately is going to be both healing and it's going to be giving you regeneration equal to 10% of this item's healing for the fight. So Bushel, very potent item. It was potent before. The regeneration, I will say, was pretty underwhelming, but I think in like Season 1, I really did like the Bushel, and now I think Bushel is kind of integral to your healing strategies here, especially with some of the new Pygmalion items that incentivize you to do some amount of shielding. Bushel makes a lot of sense. Other pieces here, so Pig's Gym was ultimately nerfed. They had actually buffed it in the patch here, and ultimately it was getting a lot more value than it was before. It went 369 in terms of when you bought a weapon and raising its value, but we can see that it actually here on the May 8th was nerfed, and it has, spoilers, on the May 9th patch been buffed yet again, but we'll see that in a second. So other things here, Beehive has been reworked, so it says change to when you buy this get 2 busy bees, so you no longer get a busy bee every time you buy a property, which is certainly a bummer, just because of one of the fun interactions with buying the Beehive was that you don't need to necessarily play it. It could just be like a small item generator for you, but now we're not doing that. It was a little too powerful. It's also been nerfed in the amount of damage that it's giving to your items here, and then the enchants change to work on your busy bees, so you can actually enchant your bees themselves. Other big things here, Virus was changed in Season 2 to a very cool item. I'll say I'll pull it up on howbazaar.gg and understand that this is, I believe, with the May 8th. Yeah, they don't have the May 9th hotfixes in yet, but they have the May 8th. So the Virus, it is an item that transforms another non-legendary small item on each player's board into a virus for the fight. What this was doing at a 6-second cooldown before, I believe, before it was nerfed, is you would put just one virus on your board, and then you would have a bunch of medium or large items alongside it, and you put a virus on your opponent's board, and then if you put one virus on that board, well, at 12 seconds, not only have you created one virus on their board, but it's going to have created yet 2 more viruses on their board. So you kind of just destroyed all of your opponent's small weapons at the 12-second mark. And if you had any way to get the virus going, this was pretty insane. So they've nerfed the cooldown on that. The poison was pretty negligible, but really it was just that you were destroying their small items on a pretty low cooldown. So now you actually have to work a little bit harder to get this thing to be good. It was seriously insane before, I will say. Other changes here that are pretty notable is the power drill. It's been, well, it's been changed, I shall say. I believe this is a nerf, so we can look at it here. Yeah, change to a little bit higher damage, and I can go here. Yeah, a little bit higher damage than it was at before, but has a higher cooldown. So, ultimately just kind of rebalancing that, I suppose. Other big pieces here, Magnus's femur now has a much, much higher cooldown. If we actually go into howbazaar.gg, we can go into this patch notes tab here, and then we can search for specific items to see how they've changed. So Magnus's femur has now been nerfed by essentially 4 seconds at its silver starting tier. It used to be a static 13 seconds that it went off at, so it's much less powerful in the early game, but if you do get it to diamond tier, it goes back to that 13 seconds. It's not the biggest change, it's not like the biggest nerf, I should say, just because the femur in its own right was and continues to still trigger pretty often. I've played some runs already on this patch and against some max, and the femur is still very viable. It's still one of the better strategies on Mac. It is a little less powerful for sure, but I'll be honest with you all, I don't think that this interrupts this from being one of the top tier Mac strategies. So going back to some other notable changes here, shot glasses. This is now increased to 4 seconds. So we can see that shot glasses was originally at 3 seconds. Now it's an even higher cooldown, which is kind of unfortunate just because I thought shot glasses was like a pretty cool enabler item. Now with it being at 4 seconds, it is going off less frequently, and generally how I like to play with shot glasses is you want to put like no ammo on it, so you don't want to upgrade it at all. You want to get it at silver tier and then have it go off like twice so that it doesn't really interrupt your haste triggers that you have on your board, because you're generally playing this with like the shark ray. There you go. Yeah, the shark ray. Pull that up for you guys. Shark Ray, which cares about when you haste, or the old Salt Claw, which cares about when you haste. So you're going to have these other haste enablers on board, and you're going to want this thing to not be slowed. So yeah, you just get the shot glasses to go off once, but now, because it's going off way slower, this is definitely a nerf to that overall archetype and build, which it was strong before, I will say, but yeah, not make or break for the build, but it definitely hurts to see this at a higher cooldown. Other pieces here, so we can look at proboscis, which I'll just tell you right now, it was changed, and then they changed it back in the May 9th update here. So disregard this proboscis. This is now, now it is as it was before. So they changed it to be an active item for 1 day, and it's not that anymore. Other pieces here is that Degenerate is now changed back to Street Gamer, which I'm going to be frank with you all, I think that words are pretty powerful, and using more positive terminology within the game I think is just better for everyone. So pleased to see that change back. I really think that this is kind of one of the biggest changes that they made in this hotfix. It's going to really impact the game from here. The rigged, rush, rust, and blizzard skills, these effects that used to have a start of game effect where they would initially haste your items at the start of combat, or they'd slow at the start of combat, or and this one changed the first time you use an item each fight freeze. Yeah, instead of freezing at the start of combat, I think that's a little bit different. But really these rigged and rush skills, these used to trigger immediately and then haste your items. It was really frustrating play pattern before where you could have a build that was potentially stronger than your opponent's, like a weapons Vanessa build, and you were going up against another weapons Vanessa build, but they had high rolled the rig or rush skill where you fought that same monster and you didn't get those skills. So ultimately they're going to win over you, and there's really no agency that you had in that play pattern. I mean, this is an auto battler, so you don't have a lot of agency to begin with, I suppose, but it still just was not the most fun play pattern, I shall say, to this. But yeah, this is a lot of pretty interesting changes in a hotfix. I am glad to see that the regeneration change to Pygmalion is in effect, because I'll be honest, I've been playing a lot of Pygmalion and that it was genuinely overpowered, I will say. It's great to win, but at the same time, I would like to still kind of have like some, I don't know, tension in the game. It was pretty much you just get hogwash and or you can get the lemonade stand and those things will win you the game by themselves. So in conjunction, it was even crazier, even crazier. Yeah, there's certainly more changes here. Those are kind of the big ones that really stick out to me. Just checking cybersecurity in case I missed something. Not really. Yeah, let's move on to today's hotfix. So May 9th. So Tortuga. Tortuga, and I'll pull it up here. This item is currently reads like this. Or I guess it was reading like this before this hotfix. So cooldown of 12, 11, 10 seconds, and it deals 300, 600, 900 damage. You haste your other items for 1 second when you use it, and when you use another friend, you charge this 2 seconds. I'll be frank, this item was insane. I mean, it was way stronger than I had initially thought it was, and mainly that was because of how much damage it was doing. To do 300 damage at silver tier, if you found this, you probably had a couple of their friends. It was pretty trivial to get this thing going off constantly, and the fact that it was also and continues to be a haste enabler for your other friends, again, if we're talking about Shark Rays or we're talking about Old Salt Claw or just any other friends you put on your board, this thing was super, super, super powerful. So they have nerfed it. Ultimately, it has a little higher of a cooldown. They've knocked off 100 damage from the thing, so I think that that is a good change. It was a little overtuned, so they brought it down a peg. Clamora. This is a really cool change. So Clamora used to be, and again, Bazaar.gg has not been updated yet, but I'm sure it will very soon. So it used to have a 10-second cooldown. Now, and it would, at the start of the fight, you would use it and you would slow 1, 2, 3, 4 items for 1 second. So now it has been changed to have a much lower cooldown. It still has that same on start of fight effect from what it looks like, but it's also been changed to slow one enemy item for 3 seconds. So you're not slowing a bunch of items on your opponent's board. And ultimately that 10-second cooldown was pretty steep. So I think that the Clamor now looks like to be a really big buff. This is the official patch notes as well. So from what I can gather, they haven't changed that on that this very important clause here at the start of fight use this effect. So you do get this, and it has a slower cool, or it has a lower cooldown. It's just not hitting as many items. But frankly, one of the best things about Clamor was just the fact that it did at the very beginning of the fight slow an item. So I think that this is very cool. I think that if you're getting this to Diamond tier, which is on Vanessa, frankly, kind of easy because you have so many ways to find a Clamor, whether it's through shops or through item generators, like the fishing rod, things of this nature. So Clamor, big buff. I'd say that's pretty awesome. And we can see here the next item, Proboscis, they have now changed that to be what it was before. So that is one thing to note. It starts at silver tier instead of bronze tier, I believe. It used to be at bronze. Yes, yeah. You used to be able to get this at bronze, which meant you could get this pretty early from Curio, but now that's going to be much harder to do. So ultimately, looks like the Proboscis is going to be in less of your runs just because it is starting at silver tier, not bronze. But it is back to the good old Proboscis we know and love. Other things here, so Pig's Gym has been changed back, and it scales a little bit differently. So this is again May 8th. We have this pulled up where it would go 2, 4, 6 in terms of its value, and now it goes 3, 5, 7 again. Also, the cooldown has been reduced on the item, so instead of having this 12, 10, 8, now we have 11, 9, 7. So buffed on the Pig's Gym. I'll be honest, I think the Pig's Gym is kind of competing pretty hard with 28-hour fitness in the showcase right now. Pig's Gym is a really great way to stack max HP and then have a bank in the backpack. I think I'll talk about some overall changes to the meta that I think are really important after we get through these hot fixes. But just one of the things here is that the weapons builds on Pygmalion are much more effective than they were in the previous patch. Like, they are incredibly viable early on, and ones that I think can carry your runs. I'll even pull up a spreadsheet here where you can see all the Pygmalion runs I've played, and I've played about 12 so far on the latest patch, and so many of those are just spamming small weapons like you would a Vanessa, and it's just as powerful. So uh, I think that the Pig's Gym, this makes it more viable, and it makes you actively want to pick it up versus using it over an item like, again, 28-hour fitness or the showcase. Moving forward to some other changes here. So the speedrunner has ultimately been nerfed from what it looks like. So I'll pull it up here. This was the initial version of this item. Had a cooldown of 6 seconds. He charged one non-toy item for 1, 2, 3, or 4 seconds. And when you used another toy, charge this 1 second. So in conjunction with something like a yo-yo, or if you've put that next to like the bottle ship, is it? Ship in a bottle? Model ship. There you go. So you can give like your toys +1 multicast. You put it a bunch of toys on your board next to Speedrunner. This thing was pretty potent. I didn't get to utilize it in any of my runs, to be frank, but I haven't played a ton yet on Pygmalion, but I did see it from other players, and it was very effective. So it's been changed so that it now starts at silver tier. It's going to charge a non-toy item for 1, 2, or 3 seconds, and it's going to do the reverse. It says when you use an adjacent toy, charge this 1 second. So works a little bit differently. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I'm just realizing I got dyslexia, y'all. You gotta bear with me. But we charge a non-toy item 1, 2, 3 seconds, so that's just based off the silver tier. And then instead of basically being charged by any toy that's on the board, the toy has to be adjacent to the speedrunner itself. Notably, it does have the toy tag on it too, so this another toy is a pretty key terminology there. Regardless, moving forward here, one that is pretty interesting to see this. So the property baron no longer has the big number skill. I think that this was, if I had to venture a guess, and I don't know for sure, was made to make the fight a little bit easier for players. Because of the big number skill, sometimes the property baron would just kill you regardless of how powerful you were. On like day 12 and 13, it would just one-shot you, and there wasn't really so much you could do about it in that sense. So this kind of makes the fight a little bit more consistent. However, big numbers was a skill that was super important when you're playing like your large item builds on Pygmalion or even on Vanessa. So getting big numbers, which we can just pull up this skill for you, I think that'll be way more effective. Big numbers. It says your large items have plus 50% crit chance because the property baron itself has a diamond tier version of it. Yeah, this is no longer here. So the fight is easier, but you can't get maybe one of the most important skills from that fight, or at least one of the most potent ones, which is big numbers. So interesting change there. I personally would have liked to see it kept on Pygmalion because I do think that, or not on Pygmalion, on the property baron, because when you're playing Pygmalion specifically, you kind of rely on seeing the property baron later in the game for your value stack builds when you're using like a fixer-upper or now a money tree or something like that. This was a really big get for you, or master salesman, but you can still get master salesman. It's just this fight is a little less important for you now. But I guess it at least means that if we remove the big number skill, it's more likely for us to get master salesman skill. But you know, I'm biased towards my Pygmalion brother out there. Regardless, moving forward here. So another change, and I think the two that are pretty interesting here, I guess I'll quickly talk about Pharaohcon. So now this is another opportunity for us to get dock lines, which is kind of nice. But talking about the Halidai. So now the Halidai has been changed to do 5 damage, and its cooldown has been lowered. This is pretty interesting because and I'll talk about it again more in a minute, the kind of weapon spam Pygmalion is very real right now, and the Halidai was one that we're pretty content utilizing. What it used to say before is something very similar in that it had a 7-second cooldown with 2 multicast, and it would deal 4, 8, 16, 32 damage. So now we can look at it, and it's dealing a static 5 damage. However, when you upgrade it, you are going to be reducing the cooldown. So this plays in way better to what Pygmalion wants to do right now, which is have his weapons go off very quickly. So the Halidai now becomes way more real, and it's another fast weapon that we can put on the board to work alongside things like our 28-hour fitness, things like our Jabalion drum, and that sort of stuff. Another one here that I think is pretty good to note is that the Warrior now has, instead of a shoe blade, they have a hand axe. So we can look at their board here. This is a pretty good change to know about. So initially, the big thing here is that this shoe blade had a pretty high amount of damage that it started with, and it had a 30% crit chance. So you could crunch the numbers on this, and without the crit chance, I crunched the numbers and I believed that the Warrior was doing at a minimum 910 damage before the 30-second mark. As I said, I've got dyslexia, so, my numbers can be off as they have been throughout my entire life, but that is what I calculated. So it was doing a tremendous amount of damage, and now we've removed the shoe blade, so the fight is now easier, and instead we have this hand axe. So the thing about the hand axe is, yes, it's giving more damage to the rest of your items, but it has a lower cooldown and there's no crit on it. So this is say what type of hand axe it gets. I assume it's a silver tier hand axe. So now I've got to crunch the numbers again. But also getting hand axe early I think is pretty nice. Shoe blade is a pretty innocuous item. One that I think is potentially potent just because of the crit chance it has on it. But ultimately I think just the opportunity for you to get hand axe earlier on is pretty nice. So that's a change there. Yeah, those are the changes from these two hot fixes. But now I want to talk about kind of my initial observations of the meta. So the biggest change here by far is how heal works. And it's interesting that they didn't change this in either of the hot fixes. Heal now cleanses 10% of burn and poison instead of removing 1 stack of it. So healing has been buffed tremendously. I really can't understate this. It honestly makes a lot of poison builds not viable, and I think in some ways that kind of affects the new items that we see from Mac. So with the new Mac patch, we can pull up some of these items. So I pulled up Mobalytics here for us to look at them. We can think about something like the Adrenal Converter, which is poisoning both players, the Barb Claws, which cares about both players being poisoned, the Infused Bracers, which again cares about both players being poisoned. So all of these items that are doing this poisoning, if you have a heal item, it works really well with these, but Mac doesn't inherently have a lot of heal items. He has a lot of regeneration items, but with it, if the component that was kind of interesting about this was you had this buff, one, for putting poison onto your opponent, or I guess the plus side here, I should say, is you're poisoning your opponent and you're doing something else. So it's like your rapid injection system says when you poison yourself, you're going to be poisoning your opponent and gaining 2 regen. Again, I think the big one here is Infused Bracers, which says you're poisoning your opponent, you're putting damage on them, and you're buffing up your weapons. The problem is when you have healing, and healing is going to reduce a lot of the poisoning you're putting onto those players, suddenly that poisoning of yourself becomes a real downside. I think that from my observation here, and again, this is just the beginning of the meta, is that we haven't really figured out exactly what these self-poisoning builds should look like, and I think that there's a lot of room to explore that. But just because of how healing works, the poisoning part of these effects are now way worse. And it kind of makes poisoning in general as an archetype a lot worse. Just kind of, I don't want to say like they're unplayable by any stretch of the imagination. However, if you do potentially play against like a Pygmalion player or even a Vanessa player that has a couple heal items on their board, your poison builds are going to feel way, 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 way less effective. And it's interesting as well that for when we look at this patch here, it heals, it's each heal iteration cleanses 10% of the burn. So it's not the amount of heal itself. I'm interested to see if this should be changed. And my thinking is this. There are a lot of very viable builds in the Bazaar where you are stacking either, like, again, look at like a fixer upper where you will stack this up with value, you'll put fiery or toxic on it, and then that'll be your primary damage dealer. But there's also other items that we can potentially rely on for these effects, on other opponent or other characters. Just thinking about the vat of acid from Mac, which is putting on a lot of burn and poison on your opponents. This item feels way worse to play now, just because it's a high cooldown. It's 7 seconds is not the highest, but it is nonetheless a higher cooldown than some of the other faster items that are pretty present in the Bazaar. And it's doing kind of this one shot of a large amount of poison and burning, and your opponent has the opportunity to cleanse that. So I think a better example of this would be like Kiwas, where it has an 8 second cooldown. And generally, the play pattern, what I've seen now, is that if you get this thing really big, or even a vat of acid really big, you really hope that your opponent has no healing on board, because just 1 or 2 ticks of reducing the amount of poison or burning from these items is very impactful. And the Kiwas and the vat of acid themselves are viable, but they're just not nearly as potent as they were before. And these compete with a lot of new items that are ultimately doing things that I think are more powerful. So I think what we're going to see, at least in the next couple days, is that you're going to see a lot less viable Kiwas builds and just like one item elemental damage builds. And you're going to see a lot more, if you are in an elemental damage build, you're going to see something that is more like, I want to say like candles, where you put candles alongside like just a bunch of fiery items, and you're kind of negating the instances of healing, or the burn being reduced by your opponent's healing, just by the virtue of you having a lot of other single instances of burning. This is, again, my initial take here, but I'll just say that if you are expecting this patch to play out where you are just trying to build up one very large elemental damage item, it's not going to be nearly as effective, just because of how this healing change has impacted the meta. So that's one big change here to the meta. The other one is that Pygmalion, frankly, is super powerful right now, in my opinion. Before, Pygmalion really struggled in the early game, but now, and I really look at this item showcase, this is just Shark Claws. Yes, it doesn't do damage itself, but it gives even more damage than Shark Claws. So just pulling up Shark Claws, we can see at bronze, it gives everything 10, 20, 30, 40. Well, showcase does even more than that. At bronze, it's doing 20, and then 30, 40, 50. This is really potent. And if you can also put the shielding synergy on board while you have the weapon synergy, the showcase is insane. This is, if you are trying to climb right now with Pygmalion, it is very easy to get a showcase, just a bunch of different weapons. It doesn't really matter too much about what they are. Ideally, the smaller and faster, the better. You pair them up with the showcase, and then you have an even more potent Shark Claws build. that for some of you might sound like an absolute nightmare, and we'll see how they adjust this. This is very effective. 28-hour fitness is also very effective. The new shielding and damaging on Pygmalion is very real. Also, again, when we're looking at buffs to healing, so things like the bushel, this item is incredibly strong. And I think that Pygmalion is certainly back on the menu for being a very powerful character in the Bazaar right now. That means that when you're playing Pygmalion, and with these new builds, it probably inherently makes Mac just a little bit worse. And my thinking is this: if Mac is trying to really utilize a lot of these new items that are, again, trying to poison or scale slowly, you're going to be outpacing them on Pygmalion, especially if they have no way to make up the regeneration. So I think that just Pygmalion has kind of become a little bit of a predator to Mac in the meta. I could be wrong. Again, this is day 2, so this is just my initial observation here. But my take is that I think Mac is going to be a little bit weaker once people start to figure out what this self-poison build should optimally look like. Then I think Mac will take back off, but just as it stands, Mac is, not at the top where he was before. The other thing here is that Weapons Vanessa is still very good. So one of the big things here is Shark Claws was nerfed in the Season 2 patch, but it wasn't nerfed to the point where you can't still play the Weapons Vanessa and just kind of weapon spam. And also Vanessa has some really potent tools now with Tortuga. I think that even with these numbers changes, Tortuga is still going to be very strong. Just thinking about comparing Tortuga to the Trebuchet, like just thinking about the numbers here. Your Trebuchet is dealing 40 damage and 5 burn on a 10-second cooldown, where the Tortuga on a 14-second cooldown is dealing 200 flat. And Tortuga is enabling itself by hasting your entire board. Like, Trebuchet certainly starts to look a lot less potent when you put it next to that Tortuga. Mind you, again, Tortuga starts at silver and not bronze, so keep that in mind. But also, just the buffs to the slow build here with Clamora, I think is pretty strong. So yeah, I think Vanessa is still in a really great spot with the current patch. I think Pygmalion is super, super, super strong. A lot of these new items on Pygmalion are turning out to be very good. I think that there have been genuine use cases for, I think, like 8 out of the 10 items. 20-hour fitness, I think, is very strong. Still don't really like Bad Blocker or Coin Cure, but Hyper Greens is effective. Pen FT is very effective. Rice Baller has been effective. These Ring King gauntlets have been kind of insane, especially when we are trying to go weapon spam pig. The Ring King gauntlets giving you income and being a 5-second cooldown, 2 times multicast damage dealer is really strong. Showcase, I think, is absurd. Speedrunner has shown that it has really high potential when you get the right kind of balance on your board. And the Wrist Warrior, even, just because you can buff up the damage on this thing and put it next to a low cooldown shield item, has been very good. So my initial take here is that the Pygmalion expansion, if you were thinking about getting that or getting the Mac one and your intention was to win, I'd get the Pygmalion one. Although I think that the Mac one will probably have a lot of staying power in its own right. Get both because, you gotta support the game and you want to get all the new items. That's great. But if I had to choose a winner between the two, I'd definitely say the Pygmalion one is better. But yeah, that's my initial take on this patch here. I think the hotfixes are good for the health of the game. I really like to see that they kind of aggressively went after that regen build pretty early on here because it was kind of absurd. Mind you, I think that Pygmalion, again, as a hero, is very strong right now. There's a lot of different builds that you can go for, and we'll see how it shapes out with the other characters in the game. I think Dooley hasn't really been touched so much with this patch and continues to do Dooley things, so you can still enjoy all of the good and fun times that you have with that character. But I think that ultimately the kind of hierarchy of the heroes here has certainly been shaken up. All that said, the patch notes here are up and live. I'll link them down below for you guys to take a look at them. And yeah, if I've missed anything, let me know. I've been really loving the new patch. I honestly was a little burnt out at the last season, but I've been playing, I think, again, a good amount in the past couple days here, and it's kind of reinvigorated my love for the game. So super excited for the rest of the season and how it pans out, but really also very pleased, frankly, with how these hotfixes have been addressing some of the more egregious things in the game. All that said, I am the Bazaar Whisperer. This has been another Bazaar Overexplained, and I'll see you in the next one.